To begin, Mr. Cameron, this morning when I was talking about the programme, I referred to the applicant's suggestion for reordering witnesses tomorrow. We weren't sure whether that was just something you wanted to have the option to do, or whether it was a definite proposal. Are you able to clarify so that Mrs. Vincent can update the programme?
It was a definite proposal, sir.
Right, okay, so that's definitely we're definitely going to have Mr. Whitby first.
Yes, sir. That's the aim.
Yep, excellent. Just wanted to be absolutely certain before things were changed on the website. Good. Would you like to introduce your witness, please?
So yes, Mr. Southern, and you'll have his proof of evidence, and on page 2 he sets out his qualifications and experience. First paragraph, you explain your name is Jack Southern, you're Technical Director in the Sustainable Water Management Team at WSP. You've got a BSc Honours degree in Physical Geography from the University of Wales and an MSc in Geographical Information Systems and Remote Sensing from the same university. You're a chartered member of the Chartered Institute of Water and Environmental Management and a Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. You're a chartered environmentalist, chartered scientist, chartered water and environmental manager and chartered geographer. You then set out your professional career in the next paragraph. Some 17 years experience in flood risk consultancy work, including modelling and assessment of flood risk for major infrastructure projects. And then in the final paragraph on your page and rolling over to the next page, you give us some examples of your experience, including managing and or coordinating hundreds of flood risk modelling and flood risk assessment studies, predominantly across England and Wales, acting as an expert witness in various different forums, including, you say recently, the East Riding of Yorkshire local plan examination, and on other major infrastructure projects, some of which you list there. Is all of that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Great. Can we start, please, with the just a basic understanding and overview of the flood zone? So for this, can I ask you to pick up the FRA CD 1111302? That's 1111302, which is Technical Report 13.1 and the FRA. Within that document, if you go to page 6, paragraph 1.1.3, you address the Environment Agency flood map for planning, and can you just provide an overview of the inspectors for the scheme as a whole? Provide an overview for the inspectors of what the flood map for planning shows.
Certainly. So the flood map for planning shows the fluvial and coastal flood risk is divided into different bands: flood zone 1, flood zone 2, flood zone 3.
Sorry, Mr. Southern, just...
You're not there, sir?
Well, I went to page 6 of the document I thought you were referring to, but...
Yes, well, it's PDF 6, sir. And
PDF 6.
And it has scheme overview at the top of the page, and then paragraph 1.1.3.
It does, but I assume that someone was actually going to be talking to the flood map.
Well, we're going to come on to those, so I just want to give you...
So I'm not looking for a page with a map on?
No, you're not.
Fine.
There's a narrative overview there, and I'm asking him to explain that to you now.
So certainly, so just with that context, flood zone 1, 2 and 3, as set out in 1.1.3, the majority of the scheme is located in flood zone 1, which is areas of low risk. There are aspects that do cross into including flood zone 3, areas of high risk, particularly around the Binbrook.
Right. And we'll come on to focus on that as it's a central part of your evidence. But I want to, before we get to the outputs, can we just look now at the modelling, please? So into your proof of evidence. At paragraph 3.2.7, you explain that a baseline model and as proposed model were prepared and submitted to the Environment Agency for review, and that process started in September and October 2023. Can you just explain from that starting point what was the process that was followed in terms of the preparation of the modelling and its review by the Environment Agency?
Yes, certainly. So the preparation started slightly before that, in that we requested from the Environment Agency their latest available hydraulic model. which was the 2017, what I've referred to as the CH2M Hill 2017 model. We had engagement with the Environment Agency to discuss any updates that would be required of that model to provide the robust evidence base for our assessment, and agreed and undertook a range of those, and provided that back to the Environment Agency, as it said, in November 2023, which point they reviewed it and provided some more recommendations, which are listed under 3.2.8. We then, updated the model based on that and our discussions around December 2023, as set out in 3.2.9, that we would address the key requirements that the Environment Agency had raised in their review. We undertook those updates between January and October 2024, as set out in 3.2.10, and used that as the evidence base to support preparing the flood risk assessment, which is subsequently used to support the ES. On submission of the draft order, the Environment Agency raised an objection, requesting a copy of our updated model with the amendments that we previously agreed, and that was objection 3001. We provided a copy of the model in March 2025 for their review. Excuse me, provided a copy for their review, which was in March 2025, and they raised some further queries, which are set out in 3.2.12. We provided clarifications. There was a number of rounds of review, clarifications, comments,
Yes.
which are set out over the subsequent points, until it gets us to 3.2.16, where we provide our sort of final set of justifications to the Environment Agency, and ultimately, as outlined in 3.2.17, the Environment Agency indicated at the time of writing of my evidence at that time that they were intending to withdraw their objection because they were satisfied
Yes.
with our work, which has then subsequently been confirmed.
Indeed. And if we just turn that up, that's CD 2517. CD 2517. It's a letter from the Environment Agency dated 19th of August 2025. And there is on the first page, there is a subheading flood modelling. And the paragraph of that text deals with this point, and just summarise, please, the conclusion that the Environment Agency reached in this most recent correspondence with the inquiry.
So perhaps the paragraph just preceding the title, having reviewed the applicant's response, we consider that the model is acceptable for assessing flood risk for the area of interest. They've highlighted there are some further technical things that they would use before adopting our model into online mapping. However, they've obviously, as indicated in the following paragraphs, accepted that those areas are within acceptable requirements for assessing the scheme.
Good. So that's the modelling.
Just before we leave the
of course.
modelling, Mr. Henderson, if you look at on modelling in your proof at 3.2.17, which is towards the end of the chronology of events that you've taken us through, Mr. Southern, there's a comment there that the model that you've used would not meet internal Environment Agency standards for updating the flood map. So notwithstanding the fact that we've drawn their objection, does that mean that they still have some qualms about the process that you followed?
So they've set out that they're happy with the modelling that we've prepared for the basis of the assessment. There were some matters that we indicated, particularly as outlined as repeated in their letter, CD 2517, around the age of the hydrology. So their internal guidance, the Environment Agency guidance that's published, says that on availability of new data and new guidance, that it should be adopted within 6 months. Obviously, the time in which we prepared our evidence base was some time ago, as outlined through the chronology. We had significant backs and forwards to agree that, and we've indicated, and part of the justification was providing, as out in the appendix technical notes to my proof through the correspondence, that the changes that occurred, the new data that was available over the lifetime of between us undertaking our assessment and the point at which the Environment Agency concluded their assessment were not material. They were minor.
Right, but are they saying it would have been preferable for you to use newer data?
It would have been preferable to have adopted that, but even over the lifetime of this hearing schedule, there's been new data has been available, new guidance has come out again. So there is a point which we sort of set out in our justification that
Yes.
we need to base our design and our assessment off of a fixed point. We indicated, as demonstrated through the technical work we set out and presented to the Environment Agency, and they've accepted that the subsequent changes, the new data that was available until their acceptance, did not have a material impact on the conclusions of the assessment.
And just to be clear on that, would not have a material impact on the conclusion of the assessment, and that, as I understood your last answer, is based on specific sensitivity testing that you undertook to demonstrate that.
Yeah, certainly. So if I could point to, as I say, the appendix to my proof. It's a rather long document, but particularly the...
Just one moment. Let's just...
Nice. So that would be, I think, CD 26-1 app W9-2. Sorry, -3. Apologies.
Sorry, I've got your appendices now. Where do you want me to go in?
So the two key sections of that are pages 118 through to 123, which is a technical note on a WSP header, which sets out our sensitivity tests to updates in hydrology data availability and compares the flow estimates, the estimate of what flow would be in the channel that we've applied to our model at the time of the assessment, preparing the FRA, with what would be the equivalent using the most up-to-date data available as of the date of that note, which was April 2025. And also an updated software version was available, so a subsequent revision of the software release. Again, we tested with both as requested by the Environment Agency, and indicated, and as you can see from table 6 on page 122, the software number to 3 decimal places comes with the same conclusion. So whilst the Environment Agency guidance says that we should use latest available data and latest available software, we've shown through that sensitivity testing certainly the software did not have a material impact, and the tables 2 and 3 on page 120, the hydrology, various aspects of hydrology again had a similar value that were within the confidence intervals that we'd expect of this type of work. And subsequently, there was on pages 181, PDF page 181 to PDF page 189, some further clarifications around,
Yes.
again, sensitivity testing, just to provide the Environment Agency the assurance that the evidence base that the modelling that we prepared was sufficiently robust and was not sensitive to the changes in data availability.
You make reference to another model as well, the JBA model.
Yeah.
Am I right in thinking that's the Environment Agency model?
Yes, so prepared by a company called JBA on behalf of the Environment Agency.
Yes.
That was prepared in parallel to
Well,
our
that's the point I
commission.
was going to ask you about. I think you say in your rebuttal at 344 that the applicant and the Environment Agency were preparing these models in parallel during 2023.
Yes.
Well, if that was the case, if you were preparing it in parallel, why not simply use the Environment Agency model?
So at the time of assessing, we requested the latest available data at the beginning of our study.
Yes.
I was not aware that the Environment Agency commissioned a separate model, and it wasn't available until after our assessment. Whilst it was prepared in a commensurate time,
Yes.
they were wholly independent. We commissioned our own survey. The Environment Agency commissioned their own separate survey. There's a comparison in my proof of evidence, I believe, of the data sources used between the two models, and then a comparison of the results as well.
Yes. These in your tables?
It's in a table. I believe it's in the main proof. So it's on page 8, I don't know if that's the PDF page 8, table 3.3-1.
Yeah.
Comparison input data of the JBA 2020 model and the applicant baseline model. And as you can see, we've both used LiDAR, the dates from 2019, although, as I've noted in the table, subsequently new LiDAR was flown in February 2023. I'm not sure what point that became available. We extracted on the survey master map in May 2022, whereas the JBA model used master map extracted in September 2020. There are some minor differences between those. The JBA model is informed by survey that was commissioned up to 2021. Through the Environment C, we commissioned survey in addition to that, separately to that, up to 2022. And the hydrology, again, was in both independent studies undertaken with the JBA 2023 model prepared between 2021 and 2023, and we undertook ours in 2023.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Henderson.
No, that's very helpful, sir. Thank you. So on that basis, we get the assessment of impacts within the FRA. So I ask you to turn that up, please, again, CD 1111302, and move to page 35. And this section is headed, that's PDF 35, this section is headed post-development flood risk. And then in your paragraph 5.1.1, you have 3 bullet points, and the introductory sentence to that says that based upon an assessment of the scheme, the following potential impacts to flood risk have been noted. 1, Binbrook crossing, 2, smaller watercourse crossings, 3, increased surface water runoff. The focus of your evidence is the first of those, and I'm about to ask you about those, but for completeness on the second and third, have you seen any objections on either of those bullet points before the inquiry?
No objections, no.
Right. So with that in mind, let's focus on the first of those, the Binbrook crossing, please. And if you move down the page to the next subheading, Binbrook crossing, you begin to describe what you call a clear span bridge structure intended to accommodate the busway. I mean, you give us some details on the next page in table TR 13151. Can you just explain what's the structure that is proposed to be installed and why is it being designed in that way?
Certainly. So as it mentions there, it's what we describe as a clear span bridge. So there is an abutment either end, but with no intervening pillar. So the bridge is one structure. The gap between the two abutments would be 10 metres, with the underside, the soffit, set above the 1% plus climate change flood level, plus a 300 millimetre freeboard allowance, so set 9.67 as set out in that table 13.1-5-1.
Right, so that's what's proposed to be installed, and then we turn to the modelling that's undertaken to test that, and you have 2 plates which illustrate that. The first is on your PDF page 36, plate TR 13.1-5-1, a comparison of baseline and proposed flood extents. So just firstly explain what is the exercise before we get to the results. What's the exercise that's been undertaken in this and demonstrated in this plate?
So we've prepared, as set out in my evidence in the FRA, a baseline flood risk model, which is the conditions as present currently without any of the scheme coming forward, and a as proposed flood model with the existing footbridge removed and the new the embankment and bridge structures included, and for the same event, the 1% plus climate change event, simulated that flood event and then done a comparison between the two. So the figure 13.1-5-1 shows in blue the areas where there's flooding in both events, a coincident flooding.
So that would be existing flooding.
Existing flooding, which is still present in the future, and the small areas of orange you may be able to see are the areas where the flood extent is slightly increased as a result.
And what conclusion do you draw from that?
There is only a minor impact in the impact on flood extent, and that's contained within the red line boundary.
If you turn over the page, please.
And just so I'm clear on the extent of the additional areas, They all seem to be, as far as I can tell, north of the Gothway estate in the area of open land. Is that right?
Yes.
And if I ask you to turn over the page to the next plate, a depth comparison between baseline and proposed model. Again, just before we get to the results, what was the assessment being made here?
So on using those same models, rather than just looking at the extent of flooding, we looked at the depth grid outputs. So for each 2 metre square in the floodplain, we simulated a flood depth and subtracted one from the other. And as you can see, the areas in grey are where those changes, any changes less than 0.01 metre or 10 millimetres. There's an area of pink there where we've got a change between 0.01 and 0.05. And that's where we've got the slight increase in water levels as a result of the proposed scheme.
Right. And that would be an increase at 0.01 to 0.05 between 5 and 10 millimetres change. Is that what you're saying there?
Between 10 millimetres.
Sorry, 10. Sorry,
yeah,
sorry.
1 and
Thank
5
you.
centimetres.
Yeah, good. Now, just so the output then, that area of the pink highlight. What about the geographical spread of that change? What can we say? What did you conclude on that?
Again, entirely within the red line boundary for the scheme in that area, north of the Gothway estate, south of the proposed embankment.
Thank you. And with those plates in mind, can I ask you then to move forward to PDF page 39?
Sorry, page.
39, sir.
Thank you.
And we get your residual flood risk and off-site effects conclusion at paragraph 5.6. And can you just wrap up, please? What are the overall conclusions in terms of residual effects?
Certainly, specific to the Binbrook or the general conclusions?
Specific to the Binbrook, which we're concerned with. Yeah.
Certainly. So, as it says there, the second sentence, the modelling has shown that the proposed bridge will have a negligible impact on upstream and downstream flood risk, as indicated by the plates.
Good. Now, in terms of significance effects, did you identify any likely significant effects for the purpose of the ES?
No.
Good. Now, that's the conclusion that you reached in the FRA. Ask you to turn back to the EA's review and their conclusions, CD 2517 again, please.
Yes.
And if we turn to the second page, they deal with a number of points. In the second paragraph, they deal with changes in flood depths. And can you explain, please, what the view of the Environment Agency was on that point?
Certainly, that the changes to flood depth, particularly the minor increases up to 8 millimetres on top of areas that are already inundated, and the small changes in extent were minor. They were not of a significant magnitude, and then they've referred to the Buildings Manual for Roads and Bridges, which has guidance that says anything less than 10 millimetres in flood depth would be acceptable in those circumstances.
And the next paragraph deals with flooded extent. And what was the conclusion there, please?
Again, the small number of extra grid cells in the model domain, as indicated by the orange flecks we've talked previously, upstream of the bridge in the open field and indicated as wet after versus the baseline case. This occur, say, within the red line boundary and are acceptable.
Good. And then we get the conclusion immediately below. On this basis, we consider the model can be used to make decisions with regards to flood risk in the areas of interest. And then we get their conclusions under the heading flood risk assessment. They refer in the first paragraph to relevant parts of national policy, and then their conclusions in the second part, the second paragraph, I should say, underneath that subheading. They reiterate that the modelling work is sufficiently robust to support the FRA in meeting the framework's requirements on flood risk. And then what conclusions do they draw for the purposes of the framework in terms of flood risk and safety?
That the impacts are negligible and acceptable, and that the scheme will. Well, moving on to say that the scheme will be not materially increase flood risk to third parties and demonstrate that it can be made safe for its lifetime.
Right. And then they go on to pick up the exception test, and their conclusion in respect of the second limb of that is what, please?
That the scheme will not increase flood risk elsewhere.
Right. And is that also your conclusion?
Yes.
Good. So then that finally leaves us, the other part of it, the exceptions test is for Mr. Sensible. That finally leaves us the question of the sequential test. And I'm not going to ask you about the policy, just about the facts on which we might apply that policy. Then can I ask you to pick up, please, your rebuttal proof of evidence?
Yes.
And this is the opportunity to look at some flood mapping. In your rebuttal proof of evidence, figures 1 and 2, please. So figure 1, first of all, which is on your PDF page 10. And can I ask you to explain, please, what is figure 1, first of all?
So that is an extract on the flood map for surface water that, as it was presented in 2022. It's approximately what was available at the time of undertaking the flood risk assessment.
Right. And in terms of the proposed route, what does that show as at that time?
It shows that we would cross areas within the extent of the surface water flood map.
Now, in respect of a potential alternative that was assessed in the ES of going along Adams Road and then continuing from that point in a westerly direction, what does this figure show for such an alternative?
Certainly. So at the junction of Adams Road, it shows that there's an area of within the surface water flood map, and then continuing to the west, we see there's additional areas of high and medium risk of surface water flooding beyond sort of the Stacey's Lane extent.
So that alternative route, on the basis of that map in figure 1, would an alternative route avoid flood zones 2 or 3?
It would still be within the surface water flood map, yeah.
Yeah. And would it be sequentially preferable?
No, it's still across the same zones of the same magnitude.
Right. And then if we move on to figure 2, please, same beginning question. What does figure 2 show, please?
So that's an extract for the flood map for planning that was extracted at the time of preparing the rebuttal, so 2025.
And in respect of the preferred route that proposed within the order limits, what does it show, please?
So this shows the fluvial flood zones, so flooding from rivers, and it shows that Adams Road, although it's hard to make out the line, it's approximately the centre of the picture, is subject to current day flood zone 2 and areas of flood zone 3, and also when climate changes are considered, the entirety of that junction is within those flood zones, expected to be within those flood zones.
Okay, so
Just to be clear, are you saying flood zones 2 and 3?
Yeah, so up to the junction, the northern carriageway, the one
Yes.
running west to east.
Okay, thank you.
And on that basis, is that alternative that was set in the ES sequentially preferable to that proposed within the stream boundaries?
Not based on the data at the time or at the data presently.
Good. And can I ask you to explain to the inspectors, there's a point in your proof of evidence about potential differences in terms of mitigation that could be provided between those two options. Can you explain what the difference is that you've identified?
Yeah, so certainly looking at those two options, we do have to cross an area of flooding either way. Where we're looking at the rifle range alignment, we have the opportunity to raise up the carriageway through the area of flooding, so it's above the flood level, so the flood water would not come onto the track. With the alternative of Adams Road, my understanding is there's much more limited opportunity to raise Adams Road itself because of other constraints, particularly around the planning and heritage aspects, perhaps. But without raising Adams Road significantly, you wouldn't be able to reduce the flood risk to that area, and Stacey's Lane beyond as well.
But the intention is to raise rifle range.
Well, the bridge is
The bridge
set with the embankment section.
And is it just the bridge and the...
Well, as set out in the plans before you, the levels, I believe, are set out in a plan. But certainly the bridge is raised above the current level of the bridge.
Yes.
Set above that flood level, and that would be continued on an embankment, which we've set out which we put into the flood modelling.
Okay.
So they were all my questions for Mr. Southern, although if you want, I'm happy to chase down that last point if you want to see it on the plans, but I know you've been through them a number of times already, in which case I'll not ask them that question. So.
Right, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Southern.
Thank you.
We do have some questions for you, Mr. Southern. If I could start with somewhere that you were taken earlier on in chief, with the potential impacts to flood risk. So I'm in your flood risk assessment, and I'm on PDF page 35, and you obviously concentrated on Bimbrook Crossing, but you identified two other potential areas there. I think you said that there'd been no objection in respect of smaller water course crossings and surface water runoff. And I've got a recollection which Mr. Henderson or Mr. Cameron may tell me I'm wrong on this, but that Mr. Sadler expressed some concern about interruptions to drainage on his land. I can't recall the exact terms that he put it in, but I think what I want to know for the purposes of my question is, you've given us clearly your view on the Bimbrook area. I just want to, although, as you said, you're unaware of any objections in respect of the other two.
So to answer your point, Mr. Sadler, from my recollection, was dealing with land drains, agricultural land drains.
There was certainly a point about drainage.
But that was the drainage point, that the construction of the busway would interfere with the existing land drains. It wasn't a general flood risk point, it was a land drainage point, and you'd have to...
Although land drains would take surface water, wouldn't they?
They do, and you asked him about that and where it went, and it goes down the hill, but his point was that the land drains would have to be... You'd have to remold it, or you'd have to do something rather than flood risk. I'd
just like to hear whether Mr. Southern has a view on these 2 points, and have you any concern at all about them?
Thank you, sir. So I'm just looking for the section of the flood risk assessment that deals with the other crossings. So we have identified a number of other either ordinary watercourse or, as you say, land drain crossings in the assessment, and have provided a table comparing with estimated flows that may pass through those. So the section roughly is 5.3.2, which is PDF page 38, I believe, and which is expanded upon in the methodology for assessing the hydrology for those is expanded on in the technical appendices, but you can see there are a number of crossings labelled 2, 3, 4, AB, 6, 7.
So you're on page
8,
38?
9. Page 38, yep. The table TR13 1-5-2. The figure for setting out where those culvert crossings is in the technical appendices. I can take you there if you wish.
Yeah.
I don't know if that specifically covers, was it Mr. Sadler's land or concern, but those are the current at surface drainage features that we've identified, and we've proposed culverts of various diameters based on the expected flows that would could be expected through the without a culvert or a way to pass flow from one side of the embankment, one side of the road scheme to the other, the scheme to the other, would potentially have impact. So we proposed culverts in those locations. Just to clarify, mould drainage, if that's a particular concern, is a below ground surface feature. It's not a at surface, and it's not something you'd put a culvert in for.
So in one of these locations, you're content with the existing culvert dimensions?
Yes.
And culverts proposed elsewhere?
Yes. So particularly where if there's an existing crossing point, for instance, if the culvert isn't wide enough, we would need to replace it. Obviously, the culvert length indicates the width of the scheme.
And sorry, you referred there's a plan that sort of illustrates those culverts on the referred to in 13.152.
Yes.
Could you just let me know where the plan that goes with that?
Certainly, it is. I will find it. I was looking at just a moment ago. Sorry.
You try PDF 81. You're looking for water.
That'll be the one. Yeah.
Water
So thank
crossing
you.
it.
Yeah. So the numbering on thank you very much. PDF 81. You can see 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 11 indicated by the red dots. The water crossing locations on that figure. Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah.
So just in terms of number 3, is that the one? Is that on land that Mr. Sadler was referring to?
I'm afraid I'm not clear which area of land Mr. Sadler has an interest in.
Well, we can probably cross-reference that ourselves. Yeah. We have a plan elsewhere of his land.
I think it probably is because it's just south of Crome Lee. Crome Lee is the Sadlers. And they farm their own land and the St John's College land. And there is a map in Mr. Sadler's evidence showing the land they farm.
Thank you.
Mr. Southern, if I could go in your proof to figure 1, which is the plan which shows the extent of flooding, or the extent of flood risk. We've read and we've heard from residents on Gough Way about flood events that have taken place on that estate. On the plan you've got, there are some limited areas of blue which seem to be on the northern and eastern sides of where the housing is. Have you got any knowledge of flood events in the Goffway area?
Yes, certainly. So if I may take you to the flood risk assessment, PDF page 26,
Page 26. Yeah.
which shows the flood zones covering both the red line boundary but also part of Goffway. This is plate TR 13.1-4-4.
Let me just get there. Right, page 26, this is TR 13.144.
So those were the flood zones as published at the time of undertaking the
Yes.
flood assessment. And as you can see, whilst there is obviously flooding similar to figure 1 of my proof,
Yes.
it then expands beyond what should be south of the figure 1 to flood those parts of the Goffway estate, shown by flood zone 2. And if I just take you up 2 pages in the flood risk assessment to plate 0.1-4-2, which shows the environmentally historic flood outline. So that was a recorded flood outline of a historic flood event covering the Goffway estate. That's the area that was reported to have flooded in historic events, previous events.
So reported to have flooded?
In previous events.
Right.
So I'm familiar with the flooding of
Right.
the previous flooding and as I say,
What period of time would that cover?
so that data was as available at the time of publishing the FRA. I don't have the specific date of the flood event that occurred, because the historic flood map is just presented as a collated, covering any recorded flood event that the Environment Agency have.
But that's demonstrating that flooding has occurred.
Flooding has occurred, certainly of the Goffway estate, to at least the extent shown there. That's as recorded. I would suspect if you look at the western boundary of that extent, where it's a rather sharp line, that's just where the recording stopped, rather than where the floodwater stopped. So you take that assessment.
Would it be the same to the north? I'm just thinking.
Just wasn't recorded at the time. Yeah.
I mean,
in all likelihood, my expectation would be that those fields, to a similar extent, well, not necessarily the full extent as indicated by my figure 1 from my proof of evidence, but certainly my expectation would be both banks within the red line boundary. We'd see some out of bank flooding there.
If we go back to page 26, where you took us to first, before you went to the historic map,
Sure.
which shows a largish area, I think it's in flood zone 2.
Yep.
On the east side of the Goffway estate. When I look at figure 1 in your proof, which cuts off most of Goffway, if that extended further, would it reflect what I'm seeing on page 26 or not?
It would. So the Goffway estate floods in our simulation, both in the baseline and the proposed condition. It doesn't flood to any greater extent or significantly greater depth.
But it does reflect what's
materially greater depth. Yeah. So it's similar to that extent. It's not the exact.
No.
But the similar pattern.
Yes. Yeah. And apart from, just going back to that historic map again. And apart, I mean, the flood risk assessment gives an indication of the areas in Goffway that have been affected by flooding. Do you have any more information? For example, do you know the duration of flood events? Or?
I don't know the duration of individual flood events on the Goffway estate. I do understand that obviously the Bin Brook itself is is a relatively small catchment. We would expect it to be a fairly transient flood event. When we did our assessment, we looked at critical storm durations of 9 hours and 15 hours. So on the scale of things, shorter, more intense rainfall storm events causing the worst case flooding. Unlike, for instance, on the Cam, where it's a much larger catchment, where you need prolonged storm events with consistently wet weather that gives the opportunity to rise and fall over a number of days.
Sorry, just going back to the point you were making about Binbrook itself,
Yep.
and your modelling and the likelihood of flood events there. Are you saying you anticipate they will be relatively short events?
So when we look at flood events of a particular return period, so the flood zones direct us to look at flood events of a 1% probability in any
Yes.
given year, and we look at and that a flood event can occur from a range of circumstances. You can have short duration, sort of summer storm type events that are very intense but don't last very long, but also don't produce a huge amount of volume, or you can have rain that goes on for days over a series of days that produces perhaps a much greater volume but not at the same intensity. And different catchments, depending on the scale of them, the size of them, are more sensitive to different ones. Through our hydrology assessment, we assessed and is supported by both the 2017 study and also the JBA 2023 study, look at very similar critical storm events for the Binbrook. We'll look around that sort of saying that 9 to 15 hour event that's the worst case 1 in 100 probability event for a catchment of this nature.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to go next to page 11 in your proof and table 3.1. And I think it's the last column, you're talking about the difference in depth of the floodwater. And earlier on in that table, you give other figures for depths, but those are above ordnance datum, aren't they?
Those are water levels above ordnance datum, yes, correct. So the difference, so those are the water level above the bed of the channel. Sorry, excuse me, let me take that back. It is water level against ordnance datum.
It can't be the bed of the channel.
No, it's not the bed of the channel. You're quite right. I
10
apologise.
meters.
Yes, no, the above the bed of the channel it's approximately 2.9 metres. So those are against ordnance datum.
What I wanted to get at was we've got the differences which are very small in the last column.
Yeah.
But the table I don't think gives us the overall depth that there would be before and during a flood event.
Certainly, sir. So if I just take you through that table and then I'll take you to where that is set out.
Okay.
So as set out in column, what I've labelled column A of that table, it's the results from the nearest comparable node, because we came up with the models independently. We don't use exactly the same points from the JBA 2023
Yes.
model. B is from our baseline model. C is from the model with the scheme in place. And so the final column, the rightmost column, is the difference between B and C. So you can see as a result of the scheme, and I should say this is on in-channel water level, so the water level expected in the channel, not necessarily in the floodplain.
Yes.
We'd expect the difference to be greatest in the channel. We see there's approximately 26 millimetres difference, 87 metres south of the proposed crossing.
I see that, yes.
And we see that reduces to 8 millimetres, 225 metres south, which is a location north of the Goffway estate, and then depreciating to 0. But those,
in
as
terms
I
of
say,
knowing
are...
what that means,
Yep.
if you're actually there.
If I take you over the page, or to 3.3.5, which is the bottom of this page, and starts the final sentence of that. For context, the in-channel depths in this is approximately 2.9 metres, or 2,900 millimetres in this location. This represents a 0.8% change, 0.8 of 1% change, I should say, increase in channel model depth. So that is taking the cross section, which is 87 metres south of the proposed scheme, where we see that largest
but what
increase.
was the 2.9 metres?
So that's
Mr. Underwood and I, when we made our unaccompanied site visits last week, we walked round the edge of Gough Way, and we've seen how there's a clear channel where the water flows through, but it's the depth of the water itself is not 2.9 metres.
not in ordinary events. If you measured it from the lowest point of the cross section,
Yes.
to the
bed of
1%.
Is it the bed
plus
of the
from the bed,
Bin Brook?
the lowest point of the Bin Brook, yeah.
Yeah.
To the predicted flood level in the 1% plus climate change flood event. That's the depth of water we expect to see in channel. Obviously, that would be less in the floodplains, but the water level meters AOD would be similar.
So the 2.9, just to recap again, that's from the bed of the brook
Yes.
to
The predicted modelled flood level, so the top of the water, in the 1% plus climate change event at that location. The following paragraph 3.3.6
Yes.
indicates what we'd expect to see in the floodplains. So approximately 900 millimetres of water. So you appreciate that the channel is significantly lower than the area of land adjacent to it.
And I think you say somewhere, but I've lost my reference to it now, that downstream of the new bridge, there will be some areas, there's some betterment. There's some areas where the extent of flood risk would decrease.
Very minorly, yes.
Right, yes.
But yes, it certainly is. If I take you back to table 3-1 and then just carry on to the latter part of it, you can
Yes.
see the in-channel water levels. There's a 2 millimetre typically
That's
reduction downstream. So yes, small betterment, but nothing that we're relying on.
No. But there is some betterment there.
Yes.
If you then look at table 4.2 on page 18,
So
in the areas where you've got some betterment in table 3.1, am I right in thinking that table 4.2 is also showing some increase in velocity?
yes, a very minor increase in velocity, so 0.002
An
metres
increase
per
in
second.
velocity, would that not be an increase in risk?
Not necessarily, certainly not on that scale.
I appreciate these are very small areas, but would you expect them to go hand in hand?
So flood risk is a product of the likelihood of an occurrence and the consequences of it.
Yes.
So particularly focusing on the consequences, I would not suggest that the 0.002 increase in metres per second would have a material impact on the consequences. I suspect we'd be hard-pressed to measure that change
Yes.
to that
No,
level of accuracy.
I wasn't suggesting that. I was just wondering if there was a decrease in flood extent, why there would be an increase in velocity.
So if I can talk you through the mechanism, hopefully. So at the moment, when the fields to the south of the embankment flood, the floodwater's obviously spread out, and it moves towards the Clare Hall estate. There's an existing footbridge which you'll have crossed.
Yes.
That's commensurate with the ground level, and much of the form is in the channel. When we remove that and raise the bridge, for lower flows or the rising part of the flood, water will pass under that bridge.
Yes.
In channel. When it hits the level of that bridge, actually the current bridge will surcharge. Water will not be able to go underneath it. It will cause more out-of-bank flooding initially. and then we'll overtop. And then once it becomes overtopped, you'll see water spreading out quite thinly into the Clare Hall estate. With that bridge removed, more water will remain in channel, a marginal amount.
Yes.
And rather than being spread out across the Clare Hall estate, for some circumstances, until it reaches a critical threshold, will remain in channel longer.
Yeah.
And then with the embankment in place, even with our 10-metre wide clear span, it'll stay more along within the channel. So we show some increase, those increases in water levels, the minor increases in water levels upstream of the scheme to the south, and because that water is held back there slightly longer, that 26 millimetres we talked about earlier, that then it doesn't have the same, it has a small betterment spread out of a large area downstream, and because more of the flow is concentrated in the channel, you get these very minor changes in velocity. But I should state that those are incredibly minor. We wouldn't normally report to that level of to those number of decimal points. I would.
And I think you give a warning about that, don't you,
Yeah.
about the decimal points? And just a very small point on table 4.2 in terms of the velocity. Am I right in thinking that all of those figures should be cubic metres per second?
So flow is measured in meters cubic per second. So the flow in A and B, and then the difference between flow.
Yes.
And then C and D are velocity, so meters per second, as in speed.
Right.
And again, so the furthest right column
So
is
they
the
are
difference.
deliberately.
So that I've presented them side by side to avoid having
Yes.
two figures.
Just sticking with the Bin Bridge and embankment, I recall some of the concerns from people on Gough Way was concerns about something blocking the channel further north from Gough Way and water sort of backing up. Now, I'm conscious that the proposal is for a 10-metre sort of distance between the two abutments. But I think, as it would described, during sort of under normal conditions, the Bin Brook runs through sort of a relatively narrow channel. Is there any risk in things building up within that area between there and Gough Way that might actually mean that it becomes blocked even with a large gap? Because, as you mentioned at the moment, there reaches a point with the current situation, because the bridge is at grade with the ground, that it just overtops and off the water goes, I guess.
Certainly. So if I can, I will make reference to page 16 of my proof. It's part of table 4-1, but it's actually reference G, the risk of blockage from the new structure. So I'll talk generally, but perhaps just refer you to that for reference as well. So if we look at the blockage risk currently, we look at the source of what may cause a blockage. And so we look at the Gough Way estate, for instance, and the Bin Brook as it travels through before the Gough Way estate and to the Gough Way estate. It passes out of a culvert to the south of the estate, and then passes through a number of culverts and other aspects as it travels through the estate, and there's the bypass channel around the outside, which you'll be familiar with, until we reach the current crossing and then beyond. So there's a limited area where significantly large debris could accumulate, because they would have to pass through those preceding culverts, some of which are at quite significant angles. We've got some right angles in the channel, again, which would more likely trap if there was potentially for a tree fall or something like that.
So you're saying that any debris that would have any significant effect would have to be north of the Gough Way culvert?
Certainly, yeah, that certainly. So that's what I refer to as the catchment area for debris. It needs to be sourced in that area typically. And currently, debris would the opportunities for debris to catch on that bridge that's partly in channel, or certainly at the ground level. So with that removed and the opening widened to 10 metres, I would suggest that the opportunity for debris to collect and cause a blockage is reduced as a result of the scheme, rather than increased. So low risk from the lack of opportunity for debris to form, and reduced from the increased size of the opening.
And I think I'm right in saying that you're saying that you don't consider it necessary to put any additional sort of measures in place, like sort of debris catches or things like that?
No, in my view, those would be more likely to cause a blockage. So if we put a trash screen or something like that in there, it's more likely to collect smaller debris that could, potentially sort of garden clippings and such that might be fly tipped into the channel, more likely to catch on a trash screen and then result in a blockage or a blinding of that screen than because there isn't the source. If there was an industrial estate next to it that did a lot of work with large plastic barrels that could float downstream, then that would be different. We do look at the source of the debris in part of the blockage assessment.
Thank you. In terms of that area of land between the proposed bridge and the Goffway estate, which is where some of the sort of both historic and predicted flooding would occur. What's the purpose of that land in terms of the scheme? Does the order land sort of extend down to Goffway in order just to provide an area to flood, or is there something about the management of Binbrook?
Sorry, sir. So in part, yes. So when we look at the impacts of any infrastructure scheme or any development, we do look to see if we can offset and provide mitigation. Sometimes that's in the form of storage ponds or excavated features. And we did explore the opportunity for floodplain compensation, flood storage in that area as described within the red line boundary. We found that excavating that ground below the current ground level would be ineffective. We'd cause greater waterlogging, expect to see greater waterlogging of those areas, and it didn't provide significant improvements or offset. So actually designating an area and having agreement from the landowner that we would increase flood levels in there, albeit minorly in a rare event, is a designated, well, not, I might use me misusing designated there, but the purpose of including it is to say we recognise that for that specific area we will increase a small increase in flood risk. We've not put a fence around it. There wouldn't, as I understand it, there's no plan in changing how it would be used or managed, and that's what we've assumed in our assessment. It's the ground levels remain the same as they are presently. The continued use of it is similar to how it's been currently.
Thank you. Just in terms of the proposed construction, my understanding is that just south of the proposed bridge, there's going to be a couple of construction compounds and a temporary bridge. What are the implications in terms of any effects on flooding from the temporary works that are going to take place there?
So any works within, I think, 8 metres of the channel would be requiring a flood risk activity permit to be issued from the Environment Agency. So there's a separate regime to make sure that those temporary works and permanent works, indeed, within that distance for channel, meet the requirements of the Environment Agency. My expectation would be that the temporary crossing bridge would also be clear span, no features in the channel. We'd recommend that the compound is outside of the area that's subject to flood risk, so that the plant is stored there. And I believe there's some content in the flood risk assessment, which I'll hopefully put my fingers on in a second, that, or others might, that speaks to that. But it'll be part of the construction management plan to seek to keep the plant safe, and obviously not increase introduce any risk to the watercourse.
And again, if you just sort of, if you don't mind just explaining something that, if you can, in terms of what the Environment Agency said in your proof, in your paragraph 3.2.18, I think you're referring to the latest, the latest Environment Agency letter, where they say that they stated that post-development modelling will need to demonstrate that any increase in flood risk remains within the red line boundary. So, because they're referring to post-development modelling, could you just explain what that means and what the effects of that are? And again, who would do it and to whom would they present it?
So my 3.2.18 was written prior to the issue of the Environment Agency's formal letter, but there's an email correspondence in the appendix where they set out their indication that they were moving in that direction. So there's not a specific line at that point between those, but taking your general point and picking up perhaps the Environment Agency's letter, my expectation of what they mean there is related to the flood risk activity permit process. So in applying for our flood risk activity permit for in the same way there are many other environmental permits, we would also support that with a technical report and what evidence base would be required at that time.
So, yeah, just so they're envisaging that should the Secretary of State grant the order, when you come to construct it, you'd then need to do post-development modelling to make sure that any other activity isn't going to have an adverse effect.
I'm just finding the specific reference in their letter that you're referring to, just to check the wording of that, if you've given me a moment. Is it on page 2? Apologies, I've lost it now. All I can see at the moment at the bottom of page 2 is their satisfaction with our modelling, and at the top of page 3, however, the FRA should continue to seek opportunities for net reductions in overall flood risk where practicable, in line with the NPPF. So there's an ongoing desire through the detailed design stage perhaps to continue to seek further reductions, but a general acceptance of the modelling and the impact as presented to you.
Sorry, apologies, I think I'm misheading, so I'm looking at the 19th letter, but you're quoting from the earlier one. Sorry. But so from what you're saying, that when they're talking about post-development modelling, that isn't a monitoring requirement that the Environment Agency have. That is a requirement for modelling for any further interventions within that area. Is that correct?
That's my expectation is they don't require any. Well, they've not. My understanding of the letter is they've not indicated they require any monitoring to support modelling to support monitoring. Excuse me. We do not anticipate, as part of the submission, the FRA, the permission, any further modelling. The modelling you have before you is the evidence base that we've used for our flood assessment. The only circumstance that I could foresee that is when the detailed design aspects are further advanced and we're applying for a flood risk activity permit, if there is any finer detail that was within the nature of the permission or the order, or in the event of any alterations that were proposed, but again that would go through a different aspect.
Okay, thank you. Those are all the questions I've got. Thank you.
I don't think there are any objectors here with wish to ask a question, Mr. Henderson. Mr. Southern? No.
I don't have anything further
Even
to
nothing in re-examination?
I don't know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Southern.
Thank you, Sez.
Well, with only Mr. Lewis to come, I suggest we take the afternoon break at this point and come back at 3:10. Inquiries adjourned. Is now resumed. Mr. Cameron, is it back to you now?
No, Mr. Henderson's carrying
Sorry,
on.
sir, a bit more
You're
me,
lucky.
sir.
I thought you were alternating.
Oh,
It's not that simple.
all that organised, to be honest. So, sir, we'll move to the final witness of today.
Yes.
Mr. Lewis, dealing with noise matters. And if I can ask you to pick up his proof of evidence, please, I'll introduce him by
Yes.
reference to that document. So I'll just put Mr. Southern's all right. Mr. Lewis, we start on your page 3. First up in qualifications and experience, you explain that your name is Toby Lewis. You're a chartered environmental health practitioner, a chartered scientist specialised in environmental noise and planning. You're technical director in the acoustics team for WSP, for whom you've worked since January of 2015. Before that, you were employed by local authorities as an environmental protection team leader, specialised in environmental noise, whilst also being active as a part-time consultant, trainer and lecturer. You then go on to give us your qualifications in paragraph 1.1.2, including that you're a fellow of the Institute of Acoustics, a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health, a member of the Institution of Environmental Sciences, and a member of the Institute of Air Quality Management. You then go on in the third paragraph to explain some of your experience over the last 33 years, including the measurement, prediction and assessment of environmental noise for the purposes of the planning regime. Is all of that correct?
That's all correct, sir.
Right, can we start please with the first topic, which is stakeholder engagement and the preliminary steps that you undertook in that regard, and that starts on the bottom of the same page, that's PDF page 3, and you deal firstly with the local environmental health officers, your 2.1.1 and 2.2.2. Can you explain the engagement you had with those officers, please?
Certainly, sir. I emailed the environmental health officers at South Cambridgeshire District Council and Cambridge City Council to propose a survey approach, survey locations, duration, etc., so as to underpin a robust baseline study for the assessment. And there was a couple of email exchanges with each and an online call where we discussed the merits and disadvantages of various potential sites, and we agreed 5 long-term monitoring locations and in addition some road traffic noise monitoring, which have to be a minimum of 3 hours, so they were shorter-term measurements.
So that was in the 11th of January 2022. You tell us you reached that agreement, and then you move on at your paragraphs 2.1.4 and 2.1.5 to address the environmental statement scoping exercise. And can you just summarise that from your perspective in respect of noise?
Indeed. So obviously our scoping submission was more detailed. It included approaches to methodology and proposed assessment criteria. The Department of Transport provided comments which had no substantive comments on with regard to what we were proposing. There was a belated scoping response received from the Greater Cambridgeshire Shared Planning Service, which, as I'm sure you know, is the South Cambs and the City Council combined. Again, no substantive comments, bar their reference to the use of the LA Max level during the night, which is actually from the professional practice guidance and applicable where there is new residential proposed in proximity to existing transport sources. So that was the only point that they raised, which was differed from our proposed approach.
So then we move on to the assessment that you undertook, and I want to start please on your page 5, just to put this in its proper policy context. On PDF page 5, you set out at your paragraph 3.2.3 the relevant sections from the framework, in particular paragraph 187, subparagraph E, and paragraph 198, subparagraphs A through to C. You then tell us, in respect of 198A, the reference, and this, I should say, you tell us this in the following 2 paragraphs, 3.2.5, The reference to adverse impacts is in the terms of the noise policy statement for England, those which exceed the lowest observed adverse effect level, the Lowell, and the reference in 198 to significant adverse impacts are those which exceed the significant observed adverse effect level, the SOLE. So that's the policy, but can you explain, please, by reference to your paragraph 3.2.7 and 3.2.8 and the table in between those paragraphs, how you've drawn from those concepts to an actual value in this case?
Certainly. So national policy does not define any Lowells or SOLEs numerically. It explicitly declines to do so on the basis that they have to be specific to local circumstances, noise sources, and could be reviewed in light of research undertaken subsequent to the publication of the NPSE and the MPPF. So we look to non-statutory sources to define our Lowells and SOLEs for different sources. In this case, we leaned on the DMRB LA111, which of course is a document of the National Highways and the devolved administration highways authorities, and they define absolute levels in terms of Lowells and SOLEs for the day and the nighttime period for road traffic noise, also for construction noise and for construction vibration. So in our defining Lowells and SOLEs for this project, we leaned on those and explicitly for online sections, which of course is road traffic. For other sections, so the offline sections at either end of the scheme, where there is no significant existing traffic flow, we supplemented those. We used those to a point, but we supplemented them with contextual information, which is suggested by DMRB LA111. We leaned on absolute sound levels, which are set out in BS 8233, which is designed for to provide acoustic criteria for new residential buildings, but in this case it provided that useful context in terms of absolute sound levels. And then in terms of the travel hub, we leaned on a British Standard 4142, which allows you to rate industrial, commercial type sound levels and compare those to representative background sound levels for the receptors in question. So there's a combination of absolute sound levels and relative sound levels for the different sources. I hope that's clear. I'm happy to...
That's the process. The actual numbers you give us, I think, slightly later, don't you? Your 3.6.12 and 3.6.13. So daytime sound levels.
Just before we leave.
Yes, of course.
It's page 4 in the hard copy, the paragraphs that you mentioned, Mr. Lewis. The table that you've got in the middle of that page, there's an overlap in terms of the hours.
There is, sir, that's right.
Between day and night.
I will explain.
I'd be grateful, yeah, because I'm used to seeing nighttime just 23 to 7.
Yes.
And then the corresponding period for the daytime, and
Indeed.
That's not what you're showing.
No, so for most assessments where we're assessing noise impacting proposed residential uses or a number of different scenarios, we would define the day as 0700 to 2300.
Yes.
And the night as 2300 to 0700.
And you have that one.
The UK traffic noise index is an 18-hour level, and that's an L10. So it's different from the average level, the LAEQ, which we use more commonly. So because of that slight mismatch, the National Highways and the devolved administrations have used the UK traffic index for the daytime Lowell and SOLE as an L10, but they've also included an 8-hour nighttime period, which is an LAEQ. So there is a slight mismatch. I think if it was just a road scheme, you would probably look at both.
Yes.
Sometimes assessors just look at the day, just look at that 18-hour period as an indicator of impact. But in this case, we've been looking at the shoulder periods, so the first and last hours of the nighttime period.
Yes.
So we had to dig a little bit deeper to provide the proper context for the assessment.
And so just to apply that to the table, could you explain the conversion? The nighttime we can take simply as read. The Lowell you've set for the nighttime is 40 dB, and the SOL you've set for the night time as 55 dB as it's set out in the table.
That's correct.
But for the day, you've done the adjustment which you explain in 3.2.8, and therefore we get a Lowell of 50.5 dB
That's correct.
and a SOL of 63.5. Is that
That's
right?
right. Is that so we can be consistent, sir? So we're looking at LAEQ levels, which are average levels, averaged over a specific period of time. We're looking at average day and average night. So the daytime in that context is 0700 to 2300.
And those are,
right.
and so if you wanted a simple table,
Yes.
if you were to take the two values at the end of 3.2.8 and substitute those into the daytime row, bearing in mind a slight adjustment of the time period, but to keep it super simple, your table will read day, Lowell, 50.5 dB, day, SOL, 63.5 dB, and then your night would read as 40 and 55 as it does there, because of that adjustment that Mr. Lewis has just described.
And that would be the case if you're working from 0700 to 2300.
That's right, using the average sound levels, the LAEQ, the
Yes.
equivalent continuous level.
So
But you do also make an adjustment in 329, don't you?
Absolutely so, yes. That's because we're looking at energy from the shoulder periods. So energy produced by bus movements in the first and last hours of the night. The nighttime Lowell and SOL are defined as an 8-hour average.
Yes.
So the energy from those two shoulder periods has to be averaged logarithmically over the 8-hour period, in effect diluted with a time correction factor.
And that gives you a 6 decibel correction.
Correct.
So they are, thank you Mr. Lewis, they are the values we have in terms of where we're going to pitch the policy in this case. So then we turn to look at your methodology. The first step is at the bottom of your PDF sits the study area. Can you just explain please how the study area has been drawn in this case?
Certainly. So the study area is initially defined in scoping as 50 metres from the edges of the scheme, of the red line boundary. But as recognised in DMRB LA 111, that can be quite fluid in a case of a noise assessment, because as the assessment progresses, it could be shrunk or extended depending on where impacts are predicted.
And then we get on to the, and I should say your 3.3.2, given some of what we'll talk about in a moment, that 50 metre buffer you tell us at 3.3.2 extended to encompass virtually all of the Clare Hall Herschel Road site, is that right?
That's right, so it doesn't quite reach Herschel Road, but it encompasses the majority of the site.
Then we get your assessment methodology at your 3.4. Can you just provide a summary, please, of that methodology and the 5 steps that you've set out there?
Yes, so as I mentioned, the Lowells and SOLs for construction, noise and vibration are referenced in LA 111. They are in turn drawn from British Standard 5228, Part 1 for noise and Part 2 for construction. So for the construction phase, we predicted sound levels or vibration levels from a worst case scenario where lots of plant and activities were located as close as they could be to the critical receptors to predict sound levels, and we then compared those with the significance criteria and the Lowells and SOLs derived from LA 111. So that's points 1 and 2 of 3.4.1. For operational road traffic, these are the 18-hour LA 10 levels we've been talking about, the UK Road Traffic Noise Index. They were assessed on the short-term change in sound levels, which are set out in LA 111.
So, sorry to interrupt. In terms of short-term, and I notice that's a phrase that's used quite a lot in the technical appendix, is short-term defined in DMRB?
Short-term is usually taken to be the opening year, and long-term 10 to 15 years after opening. And the main reason for those is the changes in traffic flows that occur after opening are sometimes quite significant, so they can result in quite different flows. But the other reason, the long-term values in LA 111 are far more permissive, so they go up to a range of 10 dB change in basic noise level, whereas the short-term levels, they go up to a range of 5, so they're much more constraining. So in this case, of course, the bus route will be not open one day, the next day it will be open, so it'll be a short-term change, much more noticeable than a gradual change that occurs over a period of 10 to 15 years. So we use the more stringent assessment criteria.
And so when I see short term either as an absolute or short term change, that's up to 12 months, is that?
I don't think it's defined in that way. It's basically if something is not there and then it's there, that's a short-term change, that's an immediate change. The long-term change is where it's very gradual and people don't notice it so readily.
Thank you.
Grateful. So keep going then. That was your 3, I think, your step 3. Step 4?
So step 4, as I mentioned, British Standard 4142 is the standard for assessing commercial industrial type noise. So in this case we looked at the travel hub, we looked at vehicle movements driving in and out of the car park and doors slamming, boots slamming, that sort of thing. And based on that we predicted sound levels at the nearest residential receptors, which are fairly close directly to the north. And we assessed those using the British Standard 4142 methodology and on that basis concluded there was no impact. And then point 5 was for the 2 offline sections where there is no existing traffic flow. So we leaned on LA111 in terms of changes, but we also referenced absolute sound levels in terms of the residential design criteria. So sound levels there, as I've already mentioned, they were predicted using the energy produced by a bus passing by one of the closest receptors at either end, and that energy was then multiplied by the number of bus movements you would have in an hour to derive an average sound level.
At paragraph 3.4.2, you reached the conclusion that the initial assessment was, in your view, overly precautionary within the environmental statement. And can you explain why you reached that view?
Yes, I can. So normally the line between a significant effect and not significant effect would be drawn between a minor and a moderate effect. So minor being not significant and moderate being significant. These are subject to context. They're not set in stone, but that's usually the starting point in an assessment. In the technical appendix to the ES, the noise assessment, the onset of significance was set between negligible and minor, which is unusual, very stringent, but I've since come to understand that the lady that did the assessment, who was on maternity leave until recently, that was actually a typographical error that on the transfer from Word to PDF, and it should have been where it normally would be, which is between minor and moderate.
So inadvertently precautionary.
Exactly.
Fine. Now the baseline, please, at your paragraph 3.5. Can you just provide an overview, please, of the baseline, and we can do this also by reference to Appendix B of the technical report, where you have, I think, the plan of the Appendix B to your proof of evidence, where you have a plan of the relevant monitoring location. So can I ask you to pick up your Appendix B?
So I think my Appendix B, I think from memory, just looks at ML5.
That's right, within Clare Hall.
Yeah, I can do
but
that.
if you explain generally the baseline and then give specific regard, please, to the Clare Hall ML5 in your Appendix B.
So a page, please.
Yes, in his appendices, so it's PDF 16 as Appendix B.
So if it's helpful, sir, the core document 11 TR01, which is the noise technical appendix to the ES, that includes at PDF page 5 a plan showing all of the monitoring locations. So MLs 1 to 5 were long-term monitoring locations. So
where do you want me to go, Mr. Lewis?
if you'd like to refer to a plan that shows you all the monitoring locations, I think the CD is
1101.
Thank you. And there's PDF page 5.
Page 5, right.
And you'll see a plan, hopefully.
And page 5 appears to be
PDF 5, so plate TR121.
Yes, have it now. Thank you.
So you can see there's ML1 to 5, so they are static locations that were deployed for the best part of a week. So these are the locations that were discussed at reasonable length with the environmental health officers at the two councils. And most of those locations were specifically designed to capture the worst case, the lowest baseline that would be representative of clusters of receptors. Because you want the lowest baseline to underpin a precautionary assessment. RTN 1, 2 and 3, you can see they were shorter term measurements, typically around 4 to 5 hours, but the critical length is 3 hours between the hours of 10 and 4, 10 a.m. and 4 p.m, because they follow the calculation of road traffic noise shortened procedure, and based on those levels we can derive representative road traffic levels for the links, which are helpful in calibrating the noise model that we use more broadly in the assessment.
And then I want you to focus in on ML5, please. So to your appendices, your Appendix B and your PDF page 16, we get an aerial image showing up close where ML5 was located. Can you explain why that specific location was chosen by reference to Clare Hall as a receptor?
So as I've just mentioned, we're looking for precautionary baseline sound levels. So we want relatively low sound levels. We don't want them affected by any sources that are in proximity to them that might make them not representative of broader receptors as a proxy. So we want them uncorrupted effectively by extraneous sound levels. So ML5, I chose that in conjunction with Clare Hall. I engaged with Clare Hall and we agreed a location that was distant from the main road. Sorry, I've forgotten the name of the road to the east there. And remote from any other noise sources and just basically tranquil and picking up background sound levels. So that's why that location was chosen.
So then we move on from your baseline to the effects. And if I can ask you to go to your proof of evidence, please, and look at paragraphs 3.6.4 and 3.6.5 under the subheading construction phase. So these are dealing with construction effects. And can you summarise, please, what were the effects that you identified in respect of that phase?
Certainly. So based on predicted sound levels from the worst case construction activities that I've described, whereby effectively there's an awful lot of activity and plant occurring in a single location simultaneously, it was recognised that there were 3 areas where significant construction noise effects could occur. And those were in proximity to the travel hub, the retaining walls, which will be necessary north of St Neots Road, and the bridge construction works at Bimbrook Bridge. So where high sound levels are predicted from worst case operations, you can still contextually consider there would not be an impact based on the number of consecutive days or the number of days on aggregate that occur over a period of time, which you can see the 2 bullet points at my paragraph 3.6.3. So obviously we don't know detailed construction phasing or plans. So in these circumstances, and this is very common for schemes we assess, we have to proceed on assumptions informed by our experience of similar schemes. So we've recognised there could be potentially significant adverse effects at in those 3 areas, and for that reason it's important that the mitigation employed through the control of I've forgotten the name of the document, the construction
The
code of
COC,
construction
the
practice,
COCP, yeah.
which will also the measures therein will translate to in due course to a local environmental management plan, which will be conditioned by the council. And this is very common, where you recognise there is a risk that adverse noise impacts could occur from the construction phase. There are controls put in place to ensure that the best practicable means are employed to minimise those impacts.
And then just in terms of the contextual side of that, so you say you also do a cross-check contextually. Where do you get to once you look at it contextually?
The construction noise
Yeah.
wise, well, on balance, we think it's unlikely there would be significant adverse impacts due to the broader factors, such as the activities that we predict noise from cannot possibly occur continuously for long periods. There are periods of respite within any given working day, and in the context of the 2 bullet points that I've just referred to at 363. So it's entirely possible to control construction noise so that there are not significant adverse impacts, but this obviously needs to be considered carefully in due course to ensure that the adequate controls are in place.
Then we move to the operational phase, the net subheading on your page 9. I just want to take this in stages. So we start with your 3.6.8, please. Residential receptors in proximity to the offline sections at Cambourne and Newham at either end. What was your conclusion in respect of those receptors?
So because there is no existing road link at these 2 areas, the 2 extremities of the scheme, baseline sound levels are lower than they are in proximity to the existing road. So this is where we recognised that operational noise impacts would be possible. But our assessment at the time the ES was produced, was based on a continuous flow, an hourly flow of buses, and we did not differentiate between the daytime flow and the flow in the shoulder periods. So our predictions were based on an assumed 16 bus movements an hour at the Cambourne end and 20 bus movements an hour at the Cambridge end. And we recognised in that environmental statement that was considered precautionary. It was thought unlikely at that time that you would have these peak flows in the first and last hours of the operation. So it was recognised in the ES, we were very likely being over precautionary in suggesting significant impacts would occur.
So if we then just follow this through, ask you to turn the page over, please, to your PDF page 10 and your paragraphs 3.6.12 and 3.6.13. So let's start with 3.6.12. Daytime sound levels. What's your conclusion by reference to the SOL that you've allocated? Are they above or below that threshold?
So the daytime levels predicted are significantly below the SOL, but they're above the Lowell. The nighttime sound levels, which are referred to in the following paragraph, are significantly below the SOL, but are marginally above the Lowell.
Yeah, just help me, your 3.6.12, you say the daytime sound levels predicted are above are significantly below the SOL, and you say here also below the Lowell. Is that right?
Oh, I beg your pardon. Yes, that is correct.
Right, so below SOL and Lowell in the daytime, and the nighttime, which you've moved on to at 3.6.13, below SOL but marginally above Lowell. Is that the position?
That's correct.
Right, and then what's your response to those nighttime sound levels being marginally above the Lowell?
Well, we have to remember we're looking at the SOL and the Lowell here, but we're also looking at the relative change in sound levels. So we're looking at them both in conjunction. But what we did was we predicted changes in those flows of buses in the shoulder periods, and we reduced the number of buses that were moving on the two extremities of the scheme until our predictions were below the Lowell and below the onset of significant effects. So you can see at 3.6.17 we came to the conclusion that to the west of the scheme at the Cambourne end, if there were less than or 6 or less hourly bus movements during those shoulder periods, we would be below both the Lowell and the onset of significant effects during the night time. And then to the east of Babbage Road, which is the Cambridge end adjacent to Clare College, the number was 9 hourly bus movements.
Right. And on that basis, you explain there's a condition, and so our flag, you know there's going to be a set of conditions, and this will be reflected in it. It won't be precisely the same wording, but when we come to it, we'll explain to you how it's reflected. So, but we'll just park that for today if we can. So on that basis, having dropped below the SOL and the Lowell as you've explained, and subject to the condition, which is not for you but for somebody else, your view, please, in terms of the framework, paragraph 187 and 198, is there compliance with those policies?
Absolutely, we're below the level whereby the appropriate planning response would be no action required.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. They're all the questions I want to ask you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I've just got a few questions. In terms of specific properties, and I'm thinking here about operational effects. In terms of properties in the vicinity of your monitoring location ML5, in that location, the proposed busway is going to be elevated to go over the bridge. Does that actually change how people experience noise from buses going to and fro and other use of the carriageway compared to it happening at grade? And if so, what would that difference in experience be? So I'm not necessarily asking about sort of particular decibel levels or over a particular time, it's just how people would experience that noise and whether there is or isn't a difference.
The difference, there could be a difference, but it would be very small. And the reason for the difference, if it's a diesel bus, and obviously we expect the fleet to be 100% electric fairly soon, but while there are diesel buses in operation, if they are going upgrade, they might be working very slightly harder, so they might be producing slightly more noise. But also, if the road surface is elevated, or the busway surface is elevated relative to the grassed area to the north, which is part of the Clare College grounds, there will be slightly freer noise propagation from source to receptor, because the source is elevated. There's less soft ground attenuation, but the level differences that we're talking about are, I should really stress, are very, very small. And of course, they would have been affected in our predictions because our predictions have been done using a 3D model.
And can you just say a bit more about what you mean about the noise propagation going across a grass area?
Certainly, sir. So if you have a road in a cutting, it propagates less freely because some of the energy, for one, it's having to refract over the top, the lip of the embankment, if you like, or the cutting, and there's additional ground attenuation where some of the energy, because it's all energy waves, is absorbed on the way, assuming that there's relatively soft ground, a grass bank, for example. So that would be less, where if you elevate the road saw, the opposite is happening. You're getting, those effects are less. You're getting no barrier effect at all, and you're getting slightly less soft ground absorption.
Okay. And you also talked about electric buses. In terms of the assumptions around there, I mean, I'm assuming the general assumption is that electric buses certainly don't generate the same engine noise that a diesel
Correct.
bus does. Presumably they're not silent, but
No.
How was the potential noises from an electric fleet being taken into account?
We looked at published works there. We looked at a study, which is included actually in my evidence, which looks at the differential between diesel buses and electric buses in a range of circumstances, a range of different speeds. I mean, it's important to note that engine noise is dominant at low speeds, but once you get to high speeds, it becomes more about the tyre road interface. But in the proximity to the critical receptors at either end of the scheme, engine noise would be dominant, and therefore you do get this huge improvement by using electric buses. And it is huge. It's around about 10 decibels, which, if you think that the decibel scale is logarithmic, so that's a lot of energy.
Thank you. again, in terms of, again, particular properties, one of the properties which seems to be very close to the proposed route is there's a property at Chilby Gate, where I think that the house has a relatively small garden between it and where the proposed route is going to go. In terms of that particular property, can you just sort of point me towards what the potential mitigation is going to be, if there is anything beyond just the type of buses and when they're running?
There is no other mitigation,
Right.
sir.
And just another, in terms of the condition that you've mentioned, you've explained why you've come up with a different figure for each point and how you'd sort of worked back to get that figure to keep it under a particular level. The last part of the condition talks about EV buses in operation. How was that going to reflect the hours where you talk about a full timetable of up to 16 movements at one end and 20 movements at the other end? Was the assumption that would just be in those shoulder hours, or would that be across a longer period?
It's not really, I'm not really the right person to answer, but as I understand it, we wouldn't have movements, that number of movements during the shoulder periods, but that's what we based our original assessment on, because that was the peak hours that we were told about at that time. But what I'm saying there, well, the reason I've said what I've said at the end of the condition is that the reduction in sound level from electric bus fleet is such that you could even run those flows during those shoulder periods and you still wouldn't exceed the lull or the onset of significant effects.
And moving on to construction noise, I just wanted to ask about not necessarily thinking about construction noise happening sort of throughout the working day, but more about particular noises that people might find very disturbing. I'm thinking particularly of vehicle reversing alarms and things like that, which, whilst they might not necessarily show up in an average, might be the sort of thing that if they're close to people's homes or happening perhaps early or late, possibly with vehicles waiting to get onto a site. How's that been assessed in terms of thinking when construction should or shouldn't take place?
Tonal reversing alarms are rarely used in proximity to residential receptors in terms of construction. There's usually a hierarchy of preferred options, which would start with a banksman. So you turn the reversing alarms off altogether. You obviously have to do it in a safe manner. So you would use a banksman to ensure that the reversing pathway is clear and safe. If that's not possible or practicable or necessary, you may use a white noise alarm. So I don't know if you're familiar with those, sir, but they sound, I was going to say they sound like the noise you used to get on the tellies, but a lot of people never had those tellies, did they? And it's kind of a sound which travels far less distance and is less perceptible even when it is heard. And then you also have voice alarms which can be used. But for your information, so actually tonal reversing alarms can be quite significant even in energy terms, because they are, obviously they have to be loud enough to be heard. So they are included in predictions.
And I've got a question which probably more relates to conditions, but I think I'll save that for a different witness.
Mr. Sanskill, probably.
Thank you. That's addressed the clarifications that I wanted to ask.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Lewis, we've talked about noise so far. Vibration. Why was it scoped out from the operational phase?
It's a standard practice there for road traffic noise and similar operational. It is usually scoped out because if there is a vibration issue, it's because there's a substandard road surface, which shouldn't be there, and it has to be in very great proximity to a receptor to be significant. So the justification for scoping out is actually LA 111 again, sir.
So that's not to say that a large vehicle going close to residential property couldn't cause vibration.
Well, it could cause vibration, but it's
Yeah.
all about perceptibility, isn't it?
Yes.
If it's not perceptible, then it doesn't matter at all.
But if it is,
If it is perceptible, then there are criteria we can apply to determine its significance, which of course is what we've done here. But if it was resulting from the operational phase, it would be indicative of an issue that should be resolved, because it would probably be damaging your vehicles to generate the level of vibration that would be necessary to bother a resident. It would need to be dealt with as a matter of urgency for that reason, but potentially for safety reasons.
so does that mean that you're saying that if the busway is constructed properly as intended, it should not arise as an issue?
Correct.
Just a question about the, I think as you described the shoulder hours and the times when the number of bus journeys could reduce and get you well within the soil and the lower levels. Is there an argument for saying that although you achieve those figures, taking account of reduced number of buses, the very fact that there are fewer buses, and is there then more of an interruption to the quietness of the shoulder hours, which could itself cause a disturbance? In other words, perhaps the character of the noise.
So you're talking about when people get so accustomed to a noise because it's so regular that it has less effect. I don't think we're in those numbers, so I don't think we're in that ballpark. There has been studies done relating to particularly busy train lines where people are desensitised because of the very frequency. But I think we're a long way from that being a consideration here, sir.
Well, perhaps not so much people being desensitised by the frequency of a noise, but in fact, looking at it from the opposite end, the reduced frequency during the very early morning and the late night. Is there a potential problem of increased disturbance simply because the vehicles are running less frequently?
I don't think so, sir. It's not something I've ever considered or seen referred to in any guidance that would be applicable. So, no, I don't think so, sir.
And in terms of where you're assessing the noise at residential receptors, just want to be clear where you're, in terms of those properties, where you're actually taking those noise measurements.
The measurements or the assessments, sir?
Well, the assessment of whether or not there is an issue. Are you
Yeah.
looking at the position?
Absolute worst case, sir. We've gone at either end of the scheme. We've gone to the individual residential or noise sensitive facade that could be closest to the busway or construction activity.
And by facade, you mean immediately outside the property?
That's right.
Yeah. Oh yes. You were taken through the methodology that you've got in section 3.4 of your proof. And you referred to the various sources of guidance that you'd used, including British Standard 4142. Why did you use 4142 in relation to the hub?
Because noise from the hub will not be steady traffic noise, so it doesn't fit with LA 111.
Mm-hmm.
There's more variation, it's more dynamic, particularly with door slams. Now, BS 4142 is a method that picks up sound character and incorporates it in the assessment by penalising the predicted sound levels based on how distinctive acoustic character will be at a receptor. Industrial commercial type noise is within its scope. And that includes mobile plant movements, vehicle movements on commercial sites. So it's not a perfect fit, sir, but it's the best.
But it doesn't include sound from the passenger vehicles?
It does when they're not on the highway, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Sir.
Thank you.
Have nothing else. Mr.
No
Wilson?
re-examination. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. That's the end of evidence for today. Anything before we rise for the day, Mr. Cameron?
No, thank you, sir.
Anybody else? I don't. I think, as far as I can tell, everybody's on. Else is probably on your side now. Looking around the room. Right. No, probably not. In terms of tomorrow, we've got so we know we had the rearranged order with Mr. Whitby, then Mr. Franklin, and Mr. Sensical.
Yes, sir. I mean, hopefully we'll get on to Mr. Sensical, but we wonder whether that will be achieved. But he's going to be here.
But we've got Thursday in any case.
We have.
Bearing that in mind, that we've only got your remaining 3 witnesses this week, I just wonder whether we can accommodate a 10 o'clock start tomorrow.
Well, that probably, I mean, that's, if you'd like to do that, that's fine by us, sir, but that would mean probably that Mr. Sensical starts on Thursday, because I wouldn't want him just to, he is going to be, the time estimate I gave is 2 hours in chief, and he may be up to 2 hours in chief, but then we could start at 9:30 on Thursday, but we know that he's starting then. That might be a good solution.
Yes.
Yeah, and we're wondering, sir, whether it might be a good idea to start at 9, even if we say Mr. Sensical's definitely on Thursday, 9:30. Well, I hesitate to criticise other people over time estimates, and I'm not, but up till now they have not been perhaps as reliable as they might otherwise be. And if we started, unless there's a particular reason to start at 10.
No. Just thought it might be helpful in terms of.
Yeah, it is, or usually is helpful,
yes.
But
But if you'd rather have 9:30 start, we're content with that.
as long as we're then, if we stop early, we can still not move on to Mr. Sensical and start on Thursday. But if you'd rather start at 10 and not have that decision, we'll start at 10.
Happy with 9:30.
Just so I understand that.
Well,
Start at 9:30. Still a chance that Mr. Sensical will be
no,
called.
the starting premise is I don't think we're going to get to Mr. Sensical tomorrow, which is why I understood that Mr. Clegg said, well, if we're not going to get to him tomorrow, let's start at 10,
Yes.
which seemed entirely sensible.
So you don't think we'll get to Mr. Sensical 9:30 or 10?
No.
Right, I understand.
but we might do. And if things sped up, I'd just like a bit of reassurance just from Mr. Sensible for his arrangements that he starts on Thursday anyway. That's all I'm asking.
My own view is that we should be able to start at 10 on both days.
Good. Excellent. We'll settle on that, so
Settling on that 10 o'clock start then?
it's a
Right, keep an eye on the clock. Okay. Acquiring adjourned, resume at 10 tomorrow.